Hello and welcome to our T Level Science bite-sized recording on teaching and learning activities and formative assessment for the occupational specialisms. So just to begin with, I would just like to give a little bit of a disclaimer. All information provided is correct as a recording of April 2023 and may not reflect future changes to guidance documents. Please always review the most up-to-date guidance. So my name is Tracy and I am joined by Marina. We are the Provider Development Officers with NCFE. Our role is to support providers with CPD, focusing on teaching and delivery in the health and science T levels. So my key expertise comes from teaching in FE, specifically health and social care qualifications, and I've used that experience and adapted key pedagogy and teaching strategies to support teaching and delivery in the T level.
Hello, my name is Marina and I'm also the Provider Development Officer. My background is science, so I have a PhD in neuroscience where I've used various concepts from obviously biology, but also computer science, physics and chemistry to answer current research questions. So I use my teaching experience is in the maths and science, and this is I use and I bring my experience to support you in the teaching and delivery of the T level. So the aim of this recording is for those delivering the T level in science, focusing on occupational specialism areas. Focus today will be on formative assessment. Here we have listed the objectives of the session. We're going to start with what do your students need to succeed? So when we're looking at formative assessment, we want to be able to track student progress. What is that progress and what is that student journey? So here we have starting on those basic like academic skills, which we'll go into in a minute. Upon that, it builds the vocational knowledge, vocational skills, and finally the professional behaviours. So when we look at our formative assessment, we track students throughout this entire journey. How do we know what to formatively assess? Well, we can obtain key skills by looking at the content holistically, reviewing the assessments, and assessing what our students will need to be successful beyond the T level. Starting with academic skills. The T level is unique in its assessment styles, and assessments like the Synoptic assignments will be something your students have not encountered before. However, the academic skills they learn to be successful in these assignments will also support them in their career and/or further study. So exploring these academic skills, we can see here critical analysis, problem solving, summation and synthesis. They feature quite highly in the Synoptic assignments. But also communication skills, that's both written and verbal, but also difference in communication depending on your audience and their level of language. Teamworking, organisation and capacity for independent study. We have separate bite-sized recordings looking at strategies to develop these skills in your students. These are available on our YouTube channel. Now moving on to vocational competency, specifically the knowledge and skills. So looking at what to formatively assess, the specification helps us out here by splitting the content into those knowledge and those skills. So with regards to our formative assessment, we need to know what to assess. And when obtaining these from the spec, so for example, I have gone here, here's some examples. I've gone through the specification and picked out some knowledge and then its associated skills from the laboratory sciences occupational specialism. Here we have, for example, scientific tasks and legislation, regulations, standards and guidelines. And once we have these for a certain section or for the entirety of the spec, we can group them into common elements and frame our formative assessments to span multiple areas. And finally, we have professional behaviours. Like we showed before, these build on the foundations of vocational competency and academic skills. So here are some examples of the areas that you can formatively assess at the science T level. Clear communication and transparency. Ensuring data is fair, so that's findable, accessible, interpretable and reusable. Integrity. Adherence and promotion of best practice. Now, these are just some examples that we found through looking at requirements in the industry. And these are things that students will develop in class through practical sessions and simulated skills sessions, but also during their placement. These are further ones that you can find beyond this list to develop and formatively assess in your students. So let's take a step back and understand what the purpose of formative assessment is. So with our formative assessments, we are creating work-ready skilled students. And this is because those formative assessments go beyond knowledge, especially for the vocations that are in high need of skills, such as the science sector. The second factor relates to retention of knowledge. Now, this isn't just retention for the upcoming exams or assessment. This is retention for life and for use in career, and applying and reviewing the knowledge and the skills on an ongoing basis. This whilst also remembering to assess both breadth and depth of learning. Your formative assessment activities will capture this journey for each student. That way students will be able to track, and you'll be able to track, how they progress in their learning, and this includes their industry placement. Also helpful to include the interventions, support, additional learning activities, and staff that are involved as part of their formative assessment. And that will mean you're able to review progress against their individual targets. Now, each organisation has their own tracking system with the results of initial and diagnostic assessments, existing qualifications, ILPs, targets and learning goals. So how you incorporate your formative assessment strategy within your organisation is up to you. What's important is that ongoing progress and development is tracked. Each student journey is documented and they know exactly what they need to do to progress and excel in each aspect of their programme. So I ask you this now. Do you have a formative assessment plan? Does it need reviewing? If not, could you consider creating one and incorporating this into your delivery plan? Also, to be clear in our understanding of how formative assessment differs from summative assessment. Formative assessment is not that topic test at the end of all the topics where students get a grade and you compare them with the grade that they got in last term's topic test. That's more summative assessment. It occurs after learning. It involves ranks and grades, evaluating achievement, and covers large areas of the course. Whereas formative assessment occurs during learning. The purpose of formative assessment is to monitor those key knowledge, behaviours and skills to help improve learning, to provide feedback and improving instructions on that more focused and small content. Both formative and summative assessment have their value, but here we're focusing on supporting your students' learning through formative assessment. We're going to look at some examples. So here I will be showing you a colour-coded table with some example formative assessment activities. Colours are going to be red for those that assess vocational knowledge, green for vocational skills, and yellow for professional behaviours. Here you can see we have two columns, formative and summative, and some examples from each. Now, some activities are going to just assess one element, for example, peer and self-assessment to assess professional behaviours. Whereas some, such as the practical assessment, can assess all three: vocational knowledge, skills, and professional behaviours. The key is to vary the method and the type of assessment to keep students engaged, but also to capture the learning of students with different learning styles. And also, as with the case of all these assessments, we will be including academic skills in the formative assessments, those ones that we mentioned earlier. So a way to do this practically can be with formative assessment stations. So with formative assessment stations, you divide your class and create different stations, maybe 4 or 5, and students rotate through them. These could be either, all the stations can either be focused on one area, assessing it in different ways, or they could cover a variety of areas. So here's an example that we have created. You could have one station where you present a scenario. There's a problem, students review it and then propose a research question. Another one could be data analysis, so practically, where they then draw conclusions. You could then have a practical session, For example, a disaster dissection, which is where you set up a practical with a deliberate flaw in it, and students have to attempt to do the practical, and then they work out what the flaw is and kind of dissect what went wrong. And professional discussion with a tutor. So you can see in those 4 stations, we already have completely different types of assessment. From verbal, we also have practical, skills, and written, kind of mixing it all up. And then finally, you can get all the students together to finish with some peer marking and reflection templates to really solidify that learning and move steps forward.
So how do your students know how they are progressing? So feedback has always been the standard of formative assessment. However, feedback would seem to be most valuable when it can cause changes in future understanding, approach, or confidence, such as the future improvements in learning, and also assessment work that can be actioned. Feedback is only useful when it can help learning progression. So let's explore feed forward in more detail. So when doing live marking, tutors can use acronyms similar to what we have here on the screen to give instant relevant feed forward to their students. With understanding of key acronyms, students can make the most of their feedback and feed forward. So for example, SAP, summative assessment piece, DIRT, direct independent reflection time, or SA through self-assessment. Sharing them with the students, so making them very clear on, say, classroom displays, will help support students with understanding of how they've been assessed or how they're assessing, what is being fed back, and help with valuable time for yourself as a teacher. This also focuses more on the processes of feed forward and feedback rather than the end product. Now let's look at the benefits of this. So recent research has explored the impact of effective feed forward. It was found that the key benefits to the students were increasing confidence, improvement in self-evaluation and more self-evaluation, better engagement, and even improved attendance. Tutors, so the benefits to the tutors was building that better, stronger student rapport, greatest understanding of their learning needs, and the ability to be able to regularly progress and monitor. The outcome from this research suggests that feed-forward approaches allow students to increase their overall effort when attempting summative assessments and thus improving performance, engagement, and retention. So let's have a look at some more ways that students can formatively assess and against progression markers. So in this example here, students can design their own formative assessment tasks. So you as tutors would create a table, which in this example here is only really from sort of one performance outcome area, but you would probably create it over several performance outcome areas and content areas. You have in the green knowledge and skills, and in the purple sort of a question or a task for the students to do. So the students will pick 2 green, one from knowledge, one from skills, or 2 from knowledge, or even 2 from skills. And they would then connect that with one of the lilacs. They would then complete an assessment of a learning as they go through the process and use these to evaluate as seen here. So this is an example of an assessment of learning. The students will have to explain why they've chosen, so the green, their 2 green and their lilac, and how they link together. They're going to have to be very clear on what they're going to create, what they are assessing beyond just knowledge, so academic skills, professional skills, and how they're going to assess. So is this going to be through a RAG status or through grading descriptors, which we will look at shortly on how to create grading descriptors that your students can use regularly. And finally, students need to be able to reflect on the process, as this will be a key element to support deeper understanding. Another way to really get students involved in formative assessment is by giving students graded exemplification materials. So this will allow the students to really engage with understanding. So on the example I have on here, we've got the pass example for the assignment 1 for laboratory science, but obviously there's a pass and distinction example available. Step 1 would be to give the students both the path and distinction examples without the grading, without the examiner commentary. You would then give the students the grading descriptors, and then in the groups, the students would mark the exemplar using the descriptors to support reasoning for grade. Finally, once they have completed a decision on the grade, you would then give the students the examiner commentary to see whether or not they agreed and what they would then change. This can be used to support formative assessment, marking by the tutor, by their peer, and self-marking, and ultimately support self-reflection. So as mentioned earlier, a really good sort of way to get students understanding of how they are progressing and what their level is as a student is to use the grading descriptors for continuous assessment. So collating grading descriptors at the beginning of the year, although initially quite time consuming, into sort of the lower to higher band, will support that continuous form assessment throughout the year and give you a more efficient feed forward tool for yourself and for the students. So here are examples we have collated from the Chief Examiner commentary from the graded exemplification materials and the grading descriptors. You can clearly see the adjectives used, which are clearly differentiated between the lower and higher band. So very little patient interaction, to excellent, to little demonstration, to extensive examples, limited understanding, detailed descriptors. Once created, this will be a really valuable tool. And finally, another key way to engage students is by creating themes. So let's explore how to use the occupational component of the specification to create themes across performance outcomes. This will help focus formative assessment and the assessment of those key competencies and skills mentioned earlier. So step 1 would be to collate the headings in the performance outcomes. Step 2 would then to group them together into overarching themes. This will allow students to bring knowledge and experience together across all performance outcomes. Step 3 is create a scenario, so a skill session, a case study with task questions that students will apply sort of their experience and knowledge to, using possibly the assessment descriptors mentioned prior for students to self and peer reflect. And finally, step 4, use reflective performance to get the students to then reflect on how they have achieved on this task against that theme. This strategy could be a key way to holistically and synoptically assess student progression. So thank you for joining us on this formative assessment recording. We hope we have been able to give you some strategies to support formative assessment in the T level. Thank you.
Thank you.